Just know that this session is being recorded, and we will be sharing the recording on our isac.org PD page /on-demand webinars. We usually upload those within 1 to 2 weeks. Just kind of depends on what's going on during the season or how busy our team is throughout the year. So the session is recorded and it will be uploaded on our page in about 1 to 2 weeks. If you do want a PDF copy of this presentation, you're going to have to email us at isac.outreachtraining@illinois.gov. We do not send those outright. If you are requesting a PDF, you'll have to email us for that. If throughout the webinar anyone's having issues with audio, you can always use the call me option at the bottom right-hand portion of your screen. It does give an option for you to dial a number and receive audio then through your phone. So if you're yourself or if you have colleagues on the line who just can't hear me for whatever reason, use that call me option. It tends to work. Throughout the webinar, I do have a variety of colleagues on the line here to answer your questions live while I present. Please use the Q&A feature then, bottom right-hand corner of your screen as well, to ask questions throughout the presentation. It's just a little square with a question mark in there. You click on that, it'll pop up and you can go ahead and ask your questions. We do have a variety of webinars that we host throughout the year. Typically on a monthly basis, we do release those. We have those on our PD page, whether it's other PD topics or PACE topics, those can be viewed on our website. And we will be offering continuing education credits as well as professional development hours for the webinar. That will be released at the end of the presentation. We put the link in the chat, which we will open later in the presentation, and that's where you're going to go ahead and access that survey link. So you'll see that at the end of the presentation. So we always like to have this slide sort of as an intro slide to who we are, right? Sometimes we have first timers coming to our webinars. Welcome to all of you. If you are a first timer, give a little bit about information about who we are as an agency. Our mission is to provide Illinois students with information and assistance to help make education beyond high school accessible and affordable. We also administer a variety of scholarships and grants to our students across our state, whether that be the Minority Teacher of Illinois scholarships, veterans grants, etc. And then here at the training team, we provide professional development offerings, whether it's virtually or in person on a variety of topics, right? Usually specifically with financial aid, but also resources and support for our underrepresented student populations. And we also talk about the federal student loan process quite a bit as well, whether that's how to pay off your loans or some forgiveness or cancellation programs, etc. So here is our agenda for today. It's just going to be sort of a general overview of some high-level changes for what we know that's happening with FAFSA simplification. We'll go through some background, talk a little bit about the FSA ID process. We'll talk about the Student Aid Index, how to report parental and financial information and what is changing in that regard. Some specific changes for our independent students, and then sort of a new section here if you have attended one of our webinars before, specifically here. We have an open issues section we're going to discuss here. For those of you who don't know, and I'll get into this later, a federal student aid does have an open issues, key issues alert page that they have been updating basically on a daily basis, right? If there are new known issues with the application they know about, they'll report it. If there's workarounds to those, they'll talk about it. And then they have a resolved section as well. So we'll get into all that later. And then some general resources we'll cover for all of us to be aware. Okay, we'll go ahead and we'll start with some background here. So this is a piece of legislation here that kind of started 2, 3, 4 years ago, really allowing, and the goal to being having this process be easier and more streamlined for our students and families. Now, I will say, given all the issues and bugs and such that have gone on with the application, I know all of us are struggling right now to get those applications complete. It's a new process for everyone, but when it does work, I will say it has been a more easier and streamlined process. Some of the folks we work with that have been able to complete the application, it's taken less than 15 minutes a lot of the time. So when it works, it works. The problem is it isn't really working quite well yet. Full implementation went into effect in the 24-25 award year, right? So they had a phased implemented approach to this piece of legislation here. Obviously, a lot of the changes kind of took place for the 24-25 year. Does reduce the number of questions any student or family will answer. We have seen as many, or as little, I should say, as 26 questions a family could answer. Some answer around 50. It really all depends. The application does have an enhanced skip logic to it. The SAI, the Student Aid Index, is replacing the expected family contribution. So some new terms there, and the definition of that has slightly changed, and I'll talk about that later. And the legislation also amended the federal Pell Grant program, the goal again being that more students can be eligible then for a Pell Grant. Some other changes to note here is that students are now going to be required to answer questions about race and ethnicity. These are not answers shared with colleges. These are not answers that impact eligibility, for example. They're mainly used for research purposes. Now, last year they had these questions on the FAFSA, but they were optional for students to answer. This year they are required to answer. I will note for the selections of these questions, there is a bubble in each of them that says prefer not to answer. So again, if students do not want to disclose that information for whatever reason, they can click that prefer not to answer box and they can go ahead and move on. Students and parents will access the FAFSA using their own FSA ID. New this year, everyone's going to need an FSA ID, right? We'll get into what that process looks like for all folks, but everyone needs their own FSA ID now. It's how they're going to log in. It's how they're going to sign. It's how they're going to give consent, etc. Now, a parent wizard tool has also been developed, embedded into the application itself to help students kind of better determine which parent to report on the FAFSA. They call it a tool, and when I read that, it kind of feels like there's some kind of outside device that they have to use to access that, and it really isn't the case at all. Like I said, it is embedded in the application. It's just a couple of more leading skip logic type questions here to help students determine, all right, which parent am I going to put on this application? And I'll show you what that looks like a little later. Some terminology changes have happened as well. Household size is now being referred to as family size. A lot of these terminology changes that you're going to see on here are kind of small, and it's really for semantic purposes, right? Because of the new direct data exchange, the IRS and the Department of Ed are talking more to each other. And because of that, they want the terminology to more match what folks would see on a 1040 tax return, for example. And another final change here is that students are now able to list up to 20 colleges on the application, right? Remember in the past, it used to be 10, now it's 20, and then 10 colleges has been expanded for if anyone's filling out a paper FAFSA. So this should sort of eliminate the need for students to go into the application in the past, right? Put 10 schools, let the application process successfully, and then if they had more than 10, they had to go back into the application, right? Input another 3, 4, 5, whatever many schools that they have, and then let that process successfully. And that's how they had to send their FAFSA to more than 10 schools at that time. That should hopefully be eliminated, right? Now when it's expanded up to 20 schools, it should be a one and done process. Students should be there. All the schools that they're interested in or applying to should be on there within those 20 schools, and they shouldn't have to go back in and remove, etc., like they used to in the past. Some technical updates for us to be aware of. The student aid report is being renamed to the FAFSA submission summary. Same document, basically, right? Same information that's going to be there, just having sort of a name change. Now, the SAR was a nice acronym to kind of roll off the tongue and speak with ease. I don't know of an acronym that's going to go with FAFSA submission summary. Any ideas, let us know. But for now, that's what we're calling it, just the FAFSA submission summary. Another, I think, nice change for FAFSA simplification is the save key feature has been removed, right? I don't know how many of you have worked with students and families in the past, but once you log into the application, right, you got your FSA ID, you're ready to roll, and all of a sudden a screen would pop up and they wanted you to put in this 4-digit code as a save key. In case that you got kicked out of the application, you had to input that save key and it would take you to where you were before it kicked you out. It was really random. Folks didn't know what it was. We got a lot of questions on it. Everyone would just put their birthday in anyway, right? Thankfully, that's been removed. The application automatically saves as you continue here. No need for a save key. Another technical kind of update or change here is that the FAFSA is going to be available in the 11 most common languages. Now, in the past, before the application release, we thought that they were going to have the option to kind of just click on a language and the entire application would then be in that language. That is not the case, right? It's available in the 11 most common languages in the country, but only through an interpreter. So if someone's speaking, German, for example, right? I'm just assuming it's on the list as an example. They can request an interpreter, and then that's how they'd be able to access the FAFSA through that interpreter in that language. Another change is that the IRS data retrieval tool has been removed. It's being replaced by what's called the direct data exchange. And I will get into those details later. But again, I don't know how many of you have worked with students and families in the past, but remember that IRS data retrieval tool just being a very finicky tool, right? You would input all that right information here. You're trying to get that tax information transferred from the IRS onto the FAFSA. And sometimes, for whatever reason, half the time, it just wouldn't work. And we really never knew why. It was just sort of a finicky tool. That's been retired. The direct data exchange is taking place at that, and it works a ton better. So that is another big change as well. Now, FAFSA submission summaries as well as ICER's institutional student information records are actually not going to be sent until mid-March. My apologies on that. That used to be late January, maybe about a month ago, and then they just a couple weeks ago updated us that these are not going to be sent out till mid-March, right? So this is part of the processing delays with FAFSA. So again, those FAFSA submission summaries, as well as the ICERs, will not be sent until the earliest mid-March. So we're sort of waiting on FSA to get those FAFSAs processed, so then institutions can get those records and start packaging. All right, so now we're going to go ahead and transfer over into FSA IDs and the role of control. So who is a contributor, right? This is what they are calling anyone who is required to provide their information on the application, right? Meaning these individuals must provide a signature and they have to provide consent and approval to have their federal tax information transferred directly from the IRS. Now, what this transfer really does too, it doesn't even say that, oh, this folk was required to file taxes or anything like that. All it says is, hey, do we have a tax return on file or not? If we do, great, here's the information. If we don't, we don't, and that's it. That's all the consent and approval piece is. So anyone who's required to provide their information on the FAFSA is called a contributor, which requires them to provide consent and a signature and must, of course, be provided. So who are these contributors? Well, it's the students themselves, right? They're, of course, applying. They're putting their information on the application. Perhaps if a student is married, their spouse. And what we may be typically used to, right, are students' parents, right? Dependent students must provide parental information, and parents are now considered contributors. So who isn't then a contributor? Think about folks who are not parents for purposes of financial aid, right? Non-adoptive grandparents, foster parents, legal guardians, aunts, uncles, brothers, sisters, etc. These are not parents for purposes of financial aid. Thus, they are not contributors and are not inputting their information on the application. So with this new FAFSA 2, the FSA, excuse me, is trying to enforce this idea that this is the student's application. And because of that, it is now transformed into sort of a role-based form, right? Where student is the main contributor to their application. And then based on what they put in their section, determines if other contributors are needed, right? So each student, if they of course are, let's say, our dependent student, needs to invite contributors to complete their section of the application. How do they do that? Well, what they're going to do is they submit some identifier information. They're going to submit the name, the email, date of birth, and social security number, if applicable, to that parent or individual. That's how they're going to then send an invitation to these folks, right? It's very important too that when they send this invitation out, it must match exactly what is or is going to be on that contributor's FSA ID, right? So email address is commonly where I've seen kind of people miss this, right? If parent doesn't have an FSA ID yet, for example, but student's still inviting parent, that's okay. But the students just got to make sure that everything that they're inputting on the application for the invitation is exactly what parent is going to use when they create their FSA ID. So email addresses here are commonly where I see this mistake, where students might put their own email address or an incorrect email address from parents. Making sure all of that matches is going to be critical for that invitation to take place. Now, if a contributor does not have a social security number, that's okay, right? When the invitation piece comes, students will just go ahead and click that, hey, my parent just doesn't have a social security number, totally fine. When they click that box, it's going to prompt them to input a mailing address, right? This is sort of part of the matching who their identity is, trying to figure out who they are. And when they do that, it'll prompt them to have the invitation sent. Now, because this is a role-based form, right, when students are done with their section, that's not the application being totally done and ready to submit, right? It's just their section being complete. So they're not going to see a submit button. They're just going to sign and be done. Then it's up to the parents to sign in, complete their section, and then the application is being submitted. So we've gotten some questions and some confusion about that. Once students are done, they think they're done with the application, and that's not the case. Got to make sure that parents go in, complete their section, and then the application can be submitted. This is sort of just a step-by-step process of what exactly this looks like for contributors, right? Student invites a contributor, great. The contributor is going to receive an email saying, hey, so-and-so student has invited you to be a contributor. Great, it's time to input your information on the application. Now, if the contributor, the parent, for example, doesn't have an FSA ID, they go ahead and create one, totally fine. Then they're gonna go ahead and log in with their FSA ID. They'll review some demographic information or that background information for onboarding about why they're doing this and what information is going to be required. They'll go ahead and provide that information, which includes giving consent and approval, very, very important. And then they'll go ahead and sign the application. Then it can, of course, then be submitted. And here's what that invitation now looks like on the application itself for students here. Happens, I'd say, maybe 2/3 of the way or 3/4 of the way through the student section. This pops up. This is the invitation for parents then to put their information on the application here. And you can see it's the exact demographic information I had listed on the previous slide. We see the name, the date of birth, social security number, and email address here. And there's that box to indicate if a parent does not have a social security number, they can go ahead and click on that. And when they do so, the mailing address box pops up for them to input. Once they do that, they'll hit invite parent, and that sends the email address over to the parent. So here's an example of what that email might look like, right? We have here the contributor's first name, right? Again, if they have an FSA ID already, great. It'll just prompt them to log in. And if they don't, they'll have that option to, of course, create one. But it'll just say, hello, so-and-so student has invited you. They cannot receive federal student aid without your help. Here's what they're going to have access to. And then go ahead and you can log in with your FSA ID. So I mentioned this earlier on in the presentation, but yes, everyone now, we really mean everyone, needs an FSA ID, right? Every contributor that's going on the application is going to need their own FSA ID to complete their sections. But really the only instance where only one parent may need an FSA ID is if you have married filing jointly individuals. The reason being is because the IRS only needs approval from one of those parents because they filed jointly. However, if we have individuals who filed married filing separately, or if we have unmarried parents but living together, there's a classic situation where both parents are going to have to create FSA IDs. Both are going to have to log into the FAFSA. Both are going to have to provide consent and approval to the IRS, and then both will have to sign. So there's our classic situation where, yes, we know everyone needs an FSA ID. Even if folks don't have a social security number, right? There is a new process out to allow those individuals to create an FSA ID. And we'll get into those details in a bit. A very important piece of information as well is that the FSA ID needs to be created prior to starting the FAFSA, right? The reason being is because if they create the FSA ID the exact same day they're trying to complete the application, the FSA ID hasn't been verified yet. Typically that takes 1 to 3 days, at least that's what it did in the past during normal times. That's how long it usually takes. And if they happen to create the FSA ID the same day they're trying to complete the application, hasn't been verified yet. So because of that, the direct data exchange that we talked about earlier, that can't take place, right? The IRS is not going to allow that tax information to be transferred over until that FSA ID is verified. Because of that, it's going to prompt individuals to enter their tax information in manually. We don't want them doing that, right? They don't need to do that. Right? If they want to, they can go ahead and continue on. It's going to prompt them and tell them and give them a warning sign that say, hey, like, what's going on here. You know, you don't need to do this right now. And that's totally fine. They can wait. And once that FSA ID gets verified, all that tax information gets populated from the direct data exchange. Also, an SAI will not be calculated, thus a Pell Grant estimate will not be shown. Again, once that FSA ID gets verified in 1 to 3 days, all those things get taken care of and the process is normal. So if you are dealing with folks creating FSA IDs the exact same day they're trying to complete the application, know that these things are going to take place. I've worked with students and families in the past where I've gotten to that financial section and I've just said, hey, like, let's just wait. I go, there's no reason for us to manually input all your tax information when it's going to get overridden with all of the IRS's information anyway. Let's come back in a day or two, let that FSA ID get verified, and we'll finish the application. So I mentioned earlier as well that even folks without a social security number can now create an FSA ID. So I'm going to walk you through what that process is going to look like when it works, right? We know that there have been a lot of issues with individuals without social security numbers getting an FSA ID. We also know that even if they do get an FSA ID, they are not able to complete their portion of the application yet because of some of the known issues that FSA has revealed to us, and there has not been a workaround for that yet. Again, I'll talk about some of the open issues at the end of the presentation, but I want to show you what this process looks like when it works. So this is an individual indicating they do not have a social security number and they're trying to create an FSA ID. This is just sort of a screen just saying, all right, just know that your account's going to be limited and these are the individuals that you should be if you're trying to do this, right? I'm a parent or I'm a spouse of a student who is applying for aid, but I don't have a social security number, or I'm a citizen of one of the freely associated states and I need to complete the application online, right? Those are the individuals who should be doing this. If that's the case, they'll hit continue without a social security number and they'll move on. It's going to prompt these individuals to answer a set of identity verification questions. Now, these questions have to be answered, all of them correctly, to verify who they are. That's all the purpose of it is. These are generated by a credit bureau called TransUnion. We hear that, we see that to people, and people kind of think, oh, is a credit check being taken place here? No, not the case at all. Again, the sole purpose of them generating these questions is solely to identify who they are. That's it. Now, all of these questions have to be answered correctly. If all of them are answered correctly, it can get verified right away and the FSA ID is good to go, right? Now, if just one of the 2, 3, or 4 questions, depending on what they ask, are incorrect, they're going to have to go through a manual verification process. So before I get into that here, I just want to kind of read some of the examples that they may ask folks. They're all different depending on the individual, but you know, one of the questions I see on the screen here, I know it's kind of small. It says, which of the following is the street name of one of your most recent addresses? Or what's a phone number you've used previously? Previous employers, these types of things. Again, just questions to try and verify identity here. So if they answer all those things correctly, it'll have a screen. It'll say, great, you're good to go. If not, then a red box should pop up right away, indicating they need to call FSA to request a case number for manual verification, right? Once they do that, then they need to complete the attestation form, which is found on studentaid.gov. Attestation is a funny word for verification form, really all that means, right? The reason being is for that cause, they're going to have to receive that case number to input it on this attestation form. Now, in addition to that, what the FSA ID caseworker is going to tell them is that, hey, we also need to get a document or two or whatever they want from you, again, to identify and verify who you are, right? Here are some examples of what they might ask. Perhaps it is one of the following. Maybe it's a driver's license, could be a state ID or a passport, or they may ask for, say, another piece of information, say a utility bill or a community ID, like a library card or a municipal card. All these things can, of course, then verify who they are. So here is that number to contact Federal Student Aid, where a customer service representative then answers them, who can look up their account then, provide them with a case number, and then initiate the identity verification process. So once they receive that case number with those instructions to provide that documentation, they go ahead and submit that documentation with the attestation form, with the correct case number on there that was given to them, and they'll go ahead and mail that in. Once that happens, from 1 to 3 days of them receiving that, they'll go ahead and send hopefully a confirmation email to that individual saying, okay, great. We got your documents. We've identified who you are. All is good. Your FSA ID is verified and you are good to go. So now we'll go ahead and we'll transition into the student aid index. So this has been changed from what we previously knew as the expected family contribution. And I think really the biggest change from these two things is in the definition, right? It does basically the exact same thing, but the definition has changed slightly. Definition of a student aid index we have here on the left-hand portion of your screen is that it is an index to reflect the evaluation of a student's approximate financial resources that could be contributed to the education. Again, this is a change from in previous years. The expected family contribution kind of said, hey, this amount is what we expect you to contribute to your educational expenses. I worked with a lot of students and families in the past 4 years who saw that number and it was way too high for them. And they go, whoa, wait a minute, hold on a minute. You think the Department of Ed is expecting me to contribute this to my kid's education or whatever? Like out of the question, right? It kind of took parents sort of abroad, right? I think the change here with the student aid index of it being just an approximate thing, it's just used as a scale to calculate financial aid. I think that's a better way to kind of define the term. Hopefully this gives some parents some relaxation, a little bit of, resolution, kind of needing there to know what that means. So hopefully that's a good change. The student aid index can also be a negative number. It can be as low as negative 1,500 now. The reason for this too is that we had quite a bit of zero EFC students here, right? And now the purpose of the SAI being a negative number is just to say, all right, how do we decipher all these previous zero EFC students to really determine who are the neediest of students? Who are these individuals that we might be thinking about here? Folks who were not required to file taxes, perhaps they didn't meet that income threshold. This could be, of course, dependent or independent students here. That's a classic example of an individual who would receive a negative 1,500 SAI, right? Indicating that they are the most neediest of students. Now, the student aid index can contribute. It may contribute to a student's Pell Grant eligibility, but is no longer going to be the sole factor, right? It's actually going to calculate eligibility for other federal student aid programs. And another huge change for the SAI as well is that it is no longer going to be divided by the number enrolled in college. This is a big change from what we were expected last year or previous years with the expected family contribution. It was divided by the number that were enrolled in college at the time. With the student aid index, that's not the case. It's not being divided. However, that question is still being asked on the application. And why? We're not sure. It's no longer relevant for the number enrolled in college to be divided by, but it is still being asked on the application. So perhaps it is fair game then for professional judgment if that applies to any sort of family who may have 2, 3, 4, etc. number of folks enrolled in college at the same time. So the Pell Grant calculation is something that happens on its own now, right? Where a student's family size, financial information, and the federal poverty guidelines are what is going to be used. And they're going to go through this in 3 different steps here, right? First, students are considered for a maximum Pell Grant. If they determine from that they are not eligible for max Pell, then they go ahead and say, all right, maybe they could be eligible for some Pell, right? They're calling this calculated Pell. And the way they do this is they take the maximum Pell Grant award and minus it by their SAI. Boom, that's how much that individual will get in a Pell Grant. Perhaps that calculation doesn't work either and they don't have anything for calculated Pell. Then maybe they could be considered for a minimum Pell Grant. So it's going to go through 3 different steps now to determine if a student can receive any sort of Pell Grant at all. If they don't receive it from any one of those 3 steps in the calculation here, that of course tells FSA, Department of Ed, okay, this individual is not eligible for a Pell Grant. So that's how they're going to do it now. So how do the students determine their financial aid here? The calculation is slightly changed from what we've seen in the past here. We still have the cost of attendance, right? And this continually cannot exceed when packaging a negative SAI, right? So we minus it by the student aid index, but we know that the student aid index could now be a negative number. Well, when we minus a negative number, we think to ourselves, all right, math, right? That turns into a plus. How does that work? Negative SAIs are treated as 0 here. So that's the way they've gone around that. Again, the cost of attendance still can't exceed the total package of what a student receives here. So that's why they have to do that. And then we also minus it by the other financial assistance. This has changed from previous years. You may have seen this as estimated financial assistance, for example. It is now being changed to other financial assistance. And what this means, it's anything that the FAA, the financial aid administrator, is aware of at the time of packaging. Once they include all of those things, that equals a student's total financial needs. A little bit of a change there of how financial aid is now calculated. Okay, we're going to go ahead now and transition into reporting parental and financial information. So thankfully, who is a parent for purposes of financial aid has not changed, right? Exactly what we are used to in the past here. We have our adoptive parents, our biological parents, as well as our step parents, assuming they are married to a biological or adoptive parent. At the state, we like to use the acronym SIMBA. They think of the Lion King, little cub getting held up in the air, right? Easy way to remember it, right? Step, if married, biological, adoptive. Nice way to remember it if you ever have trouble. If we have both parents that are unmarried but still living together, we know both individuals need to report their information on the FAFSA. Now they both are going to need FSA IDs. They're both going to have to log in, and they're both going to have to provide consent and sign. Here is the change when it comes to reporting parental information. If we have divorced or separated parents, the student will now report the parent who provides the most financial support to the student within the last 12 months. In the past, this was whoever the student lived with the most in the last 12 months, and that is no longer relevant. It's whoever provides the most financial support to the student within the last 12 months. If that's a tie, right, you might have parents who come to you, for example, and go, listen, the court documents, the judge, everything says 50-50 for financial support. That's what it says in the decree. Now what do we do? Okay, if that is the case, then you report the parent with the greater income or assets. So that's how parental information is now reported for our divorced or separated parents. Now, I mentioned that parent wizard tool earlier. It's sort of embedded in the application. This is going to help students kind of better determine which of those parents they input on the application if they come across that situation here. All right. So the first thing you're seeing on your screen is just, hey, are your parents married to each other? First question they're going to see. And we know, yeah, if parents are married to each other, yes, great. You need both parents' information. Easy enough. But what if that answer is no? Then they're going to see some additional questions that would tell them, hey, all right, are your parents divorced or separated, right? Does one parent provide more financial support to the other? They go through each of those steps just as I went through with you on the last slide. And then it goes, okay, then that's the parent you've identified. That's the parent that needs to go on the application. So I think it's helpful to see if students kind of see that more transparent information here, step-by-step guidance about which parent they need to report on the FAFSA. Now, reporting tax information has changed as well. Mentioned in the beginning of the presentation that the IRS data retrieval tool is no more. It has been retired, and it has been replaced via the direct data exchange, where everyone's going to have to require to provide consent for their tax information to be shared from the IRS with FSA. This includes non-tax filers even, right? Doesn't matter if they haven't filed taxes. Again, if they don't have a tax file on record, the IRS just says, hey, we don't got nothing, no problem. Everyone's going to have to provide consent on the application, specifically if we have our married filing separately folks, as well as our unmarried parents, but living together. Every contributor that's required to, right, they all need to provide consent. If all contributors do not provide consent, then an SAI will not be calculated for the student. Thus, the student is ineligible for federal student aid. No exceptions to that, right? Doesn't even matter if parents decline or deny that consent and then they put in their information in manually. It doesn't matter, right? If they have all that information in there, but they didn't provide consent, student gets no aid. There's no exceptions to this. It's extremely important that everybody inputting their information on the application provides consent. How investment information is being reported has also slightly changed as well. They're carved out some new exceptions for even if folks will see investment questions, right? I've worked with quite a few families who have not even been asked the traditional investment questions that we're used to. And it's probably because they met one of these three criteria on the left-hand portion of your screen. So let's go through those. If you have individuals, those who make less than $60,000 a year, we're talking about the parents of dependent students or just independent students themselves, right? If they make less than $60,000 a year, they're not even going to see the asset questions, right? Cash savings checking accounts, other investments, including real estate, businesses, and farms. Those questions, they will not even see them on the application, and it'll take them right through. Or if anyone in the household has received means-tested federal benefit programs within the last 2 years, then they wouldn't see the asset questions on there. Or if a student has a negative SAI, and the system would know this pretty quickly once they give consent that direct data exchange takes place on the back end. Really quickly, they don't even see anything populated from it. They'll know pretty much right away then if the student's going to have a negative SAI. And if that were to be the case, they would not see any investment questions on the application. So let's assume that one of those three things are not true, right? One of those three things, nothing in that is true. Great. Let's say they are then required to report investment information. Okay, what do they need to report? Those traditional investment questions that we're used to on the application will show up. And then it's the net worth of any business or any farm must be reported on the application. Now, this is a change from previous years, right? Remember in the past, they had that small business and small farm exception. If that family owned more than half and had 100 or fewer full-time employees, they didn't have to report that business or that farm. That's no longer the case. If none of those three things is true on the left-hand portion of your screen, then any sort of business and any farm, the net worth of that business or farm must be reported. We still exclude the home in which the student and family live in. That has not changed. And then child support received is going to be asked in the investment section, assuming folks are required to report investments. The reason being is because the child support paid question has been eliminated, and only the child support received question is there. And it's in the asset portion because the FSA considers anything not transferred over from the direct data exchange is an asset. So that's why you're going to see it in that section. Again, child support paid question has been eliminated, but the child support received question for the most recent calendar year will be in this section. We'll go ahead and go through some specific changes in terms of independency. So professional judgment, now they've kind of carved out some new policies here for what this means. What I mean is now there's two categories of professional judgment, right? They have labeled these special circumstances and unusual circumstances. So a special circumstance, really we're talking about money, right? This is adjusting the data elements in the cost of attendance or in the SAI calculation that would alter maybe how much they would receive in need-based aid, right? So special circumstances, I like to think about money. In unusual circumstances, we're solely thinking about dependency status here. Adjusting that student's dependency status based upon a unique situation, right? If you have individuals, right, you think about the acceptable reasons for not providing parental information, right? Parents are incarcerated. Maybe they are fleeing an abusive household. Maybe they just don't know where their parents are. There's no way to contact them, no idea where they are. Those are acceptable reasons for not providing parental information. Thus, a dependency override can be requested and take place, and they are calling those now unusual circumstances. So when I hear special circumstances, I'm thinking about money. When I hear unusual circumstances, I'm thinking about dependency status. That's the best way I can kind of decipher between the two. Now what's new as well is that schools can no longer maintain a policy of just denying all professional judgment requests outright. There were some institutions out there that just didn't hear these cases at all for students. They had no policy for it. They didn't hear any professional judgment cases. And so, of course, then students were not being accepted for professional judgment. Now, that's no longer the case. Schools now have to maintain a policy to at least hear students out, right? They're still judge, jury, and executioner of their professional judgment and who they decide to accept or deny for those cases, but they at least need to hear students out. And that's sort of the new policy change. Also, schools are required to now have a list of adequate documentation that can be used for making the request. So if a student's sitting there and they go, listen, I want to make a dependency override. My parents are incarcerated. How do I go about that? Well, when they go now to their institution's site, it should have a list there somewhere now about, all right, if you're trying to request A, here are the documents that you're going to be asked for. So that way students sort of have a little bit of some awareness prior to entering the process here. They can kind of prepare those things. Again, trying to increase the transparency between institutions and students. Talked about this already, some examples here of what these two are. Here's a nice sort of little organized list, right? Unusual circumstances, we're thinking about dependency status here, right? Legally granted refugee or asylum status is another reason I didn't mention. Victims of human trafficking is another reason I didn't mention here. The bottom two we did talk about already. What are some special circumstances then? We didn't really talk a little bit about those, but maybe we have some, sudden loss of employment or a financial asset. And that could be due to a couple of things, right? Maybe someone got laid off. Maybe there was a sudden death in the family that led to this happening. Those are special circumstances. Maybe there is some increased tuition expenses for elementary or secondary school for whatever reason. Unusual medical or dental expenses not covered by insurance. All of these things can be special circumstances and thus can go through a professional judgment process. So new this year as well, students can now file as what they're calling provisionally independent. These are for students who believe they qualify as independent, but they still need to go through the dependency override process. Really, all this allows students to do then is just complete the entire application and does allow them then to receive an estimated SAI and Pell Grant amount. They still need to go through the determination process from the institution to get this dependency override request done. But at the very least, it now allows students to complete the application and receive some estimated financial aid numbers. In the past, that wasn't the case, right? They would have to just say, I'm moving on without providing parental information, and then that was it. And then they had to go through the institution and do it later. At the very least, with this provisionally independent status here, it allows students to complete the application with some estimated numbers. So some specific changes here for unaccompanied homeless youth, as well as for some other independent students here. The list of people who can provide a determination has been expanded, right? So when you're going into that unaccompanied homeless youth question here, if folks have a determination or if they don't, they're going to see a larger list about who can now make that determination. So here is the list that you'll see on the application here. Some of these are familiar to us. Maybe you have the high school homeless district liaison, perhaps a financial aid office or an administrator from a different school that for the same or prior award year can now make a determination of homelessness. This is basically saying, okay, I got a student here at NIU, right? NIU went through this process. We've determined that they are an unaccompanied homeless youth, good to go. Maybe that same student wants to transfer, right? Their sophomore year, now they're at Western Illinois University. What this is saying is that Western Illinois' financial aid office is now encouraged to accept the documentation and the process from NIU to say, okay, this just carries over. You've been granted independency status here at our institution as well, which is, again, preventing then or not allowing the student then to go through this process every single time. No need for that. So that's what they're trying to encourage. Other folks that can make determinations are the director, designee of director of a variety of types of programs, whether that be a transitional or emergency shelter, perhaps a street outreach program, a youth drop-in center, a program supported by the federal TRIO or GERO grant, or, and this is the biggest one, on the application it says other programs serving individuals experiencing homelessness. That's very broad, right? That's a big change. This is basically saying any sort of program that serves homeless students, the director of that program can make this determination. That was not on the application in the past. It has been added this year. So it's pretty broad to see which kind of programs and what kind of directors can now make homeless determinations. So what can higher educations do now here, right? Again, talking about this earlier with my example with NIU and Western Illinois. Schools can accept that documentation and those statuses from other institutions, and they're encouraged to do so. Another big change too, now let's say that same students at NIU, once they've been granted independency status at NIU, for the same subsequent years they attend NIU, they're considered independent, right? They don't need to go through a renewal process at that same institution each year, right? This prolongs the process. Sometimes it's hard for students to do this. They forget for whatever reason here. No longer is that going to be required. If that institution is attending the same institution, if that student is, I should say, they no longer need to submit that documentation every single year. So that's a nice change as well. Some elements of the cost of attendance have changed as well in terms of terminology and what's now to be included. So the Department of Ed now has the authority to regulate what's in a school's cost of attendance, except for tuition and fees. Now, this doesn't mean that they're going to for whatever reason. They haven't indicated that they're going to, but now with the new legislation, they do have the authority to if they exercise that right. Some terminology changes. Room and board is now being called food and housing, right? Again, if you all say room and board, we know what you're talking about, right? But now it's called food and housing. I'm sure it'll take us another year or two to all kind of get used to these new terms. Books and supplies is now called books, course materials, and equipment. Dependent care now needs to be included in a school's cost of attendance, right? I'm thinking about like what it costs to have 3 meals a day, for example. Study abroad expenses, if that's applicable. Transportation expenses now needs to include travel between home, school, and work. Federal student loan origination fees, or the cost of professional licensing for maybe some specific programs or certifications or credentials. I'm thinking about teachers in this situation. I don't remember what it's called, but I know they have to go through an additional certification process while they attend there that does cost them some extra money. Now, schools are also required to disclose all of these elements of their cost of attendance on their website. This is wherever tuition and fees are reported, right? Now, it doesn't have to be this long list every single time it's mentioned, but it does need to be prominently displayed on their website. And every time tuition and fees is mentioned, it at least needs to be linked back to where they can find this information. Again, the point is just to increase transparency. So just don't have it hiding on their sites, I guess is what they're trying to say. Okay, so now I want to go ahead and dive into some of the open key issue alerts that FSA has identified that's currently going on with the application. I'm sure a lot of you working with students know that there's quite a bit of issues going on with the FAFSA, lots of bugs and glitches and such. Well, they do have a page that says, hey, we are aware of these following issues here. Here's a workaround if we have one, or here is us saying there's no workaround at all. I have linked where you could find this on FSA's partner site. Honestly, if you just Google FSA key open issue alert page, it should be the first thing you pop up. Just make sure you're at the Department of Ed site and you'll be able to see it. I have the site open every day and I refresh it every day just to see, hey, are there any new issues that they know about that they are talking about? Or are there any issues that they have resolved for us? So it's something I've looked into every day. I want to go through some of the main ones here that they have on that page. So here are some known issues that do have workarounds currently while they're being resolved, right? We'll start with the top one. If a student incorrectly selects eligible non-citizen and completes the demographic section, they will not be able to submit the FAFSA after they correct their citizenship status, right? So let's say they think they're an eligible non-citizen, they go through the rest of the demographic section, and then they realize, oh, wait a minute, no, I am a U.S. citizen. I have to go back. If they try to change that, it doesn't allow them to move forward. Error screens pop up, it freezes them on that screen, and they get stuck. They just can't complete the application. FSA's workaround to identify this is to delete their current application and start a new one. And then, of course, when they get to that citizenship portion of the application here, do not make that same mistake again, because then they'll have to delete the application again. Another issue is for student or parent who returns to a signed and saved FAFSA, but it's still required to have a contributor information on there that no longer, of course, then has their signature, right? So basically they're going in, they got some signatures, they're almost done. And then when they go back in to complete it, they realize their signatures have been deleted and no one knows why that's happening, right? So they're just saying, listen, just re-sign it. It's a bug. We're aware of it. It's deleting signatures here. We're working on it. Just re-sign the FAFSA. Make sure signatures are in place prior to you submitting the application. Another issue with the workaround is that the college names are truncated. It's been difficult to distinguish between when colleges say have multiple campuses or multiple programs. I forgot what the school was back in January. I was working with a student. I think it was maybe UIC, University of Illinois, Chicago. And all their different programs were popping up next to the school, like psychology and a medical thing. And it was a ton of options. And we were confused. Like, I'm not sure which one to put down here. What is the school and what isn't? Biggest workaround for that is just to search schools by the federal school code. Easiest way to do this here. You can find it on a simple Google search, honestly, but I have linked where FSA has the full list of all the federal school codes. You can find that on their partner site. It's been the easiest way to input schools because of some of this kind of difficulty in distinguishing what school is the right school. Here are some of the issues that we have seen without workarounds, right? Students without social security numbers that exit the FAFSA form before the state of legal residency question will be unable to continue or start a new form, and they have not received a solution for that quite yet. I think the second one here is the biggest issue that we have come across, at least on our end in the field. I'd be curious to see if you guys have all come across this as well. Parents without social security numbers are just unable to start the FAFSA form for their student to contribute to an existing form, right? Again, even if the student starts the application first, parents without social security numbers, even if they have an FSA ID that's verified, cannot complete the application. They're done. They can't do it, right? Their folks are basically stuck here. FSA has said that, yeah, there's no workaround to this quite yet. If folks don't have social security numbers, they're pretty much stuck at this point. Even the FSA ID creation process, right? We've seen rare instances where folks without social security numbers can get their FSA IDs verified, but the large majority of folks are not getting those FSA IDs verified. So they can't even get to this point anyway. So we're waiting for guidance. We're waiting for FSA to kind of have some resolved issues on this here. They say they are working on it, so we just kind of have to hang tight. A third known issue without a workaround, we have a married student or parent who does not provide spouse's information before leaving the FAFSA will not be able to complete and submit after returning to the form. Really strange, right? Got that married student. I've seen this with parents more often or not, right? Student invites parent one does them. Now they got to go ahead and put their spouse's information in, but for whatever reason they stop. They go, hey, listen, I can't do it right now. I'm going to save it. I'll come back later. I'll put my wife's information in, for example. They try and do that maybe the next day, and it doesn't let them in the form. Doesn't let them do anything. Doesn't let them complete that section. It gets them to be stuck. No workaround for that right now. Again, FSA is aware of that and are working on that glitch. Just a couple of more issues that maybe sort of aren't officially announced here that maybe we've seen in the field. We've had some nonprofit organizations who, have partnerships, NCAN, for example, who have talked about these things. I'm trying to get this more on FSA's radar here. Just a couple of those I want to talk about. So this first one is a student unable to save or submit their FAFSA form when entering an alien registration number that ends in 0. For whatever reason, if they have an A number and it ends in 0, an error message pops up. It does not allow them to move on in the application here. It explains that this is false or whatever else it is, and it's a glitch. There's no workaround to this right now. There's no resolved issue on this. This is just sort of something that is kind of getting students to be stuck. So that's another thing to kind of be aware of that we are seeing in the field. And then I want to talk a little bit about the call center. Not something that's been on FSA's site or anything like that, but because we know of the difficulties in obtaining an FSA ID for those without social security number here, we know that the manual verification process has to start with them calling FSA, right? And the call center is just completely overwhelmed, right? A lot of times folks are getting on hold and they have to wait for 2 or 3 hours here. A lot of times the system is dropping their calls. That's by design. If they are over flooded, they won't even accept the phone call, take it even the case. It just drops you right away. That's by design. So long story short, the system's overloaded, right? If you do get a hold of somebody and you're trying to receive a case number for an individual, right, without a social security number, you're trying to get that verification process started. We have found that it helps if you ask for a tier 2 FSA ID specialist, right? Typically, if you say, listen, I need an FSA ID specialist, it seems to be a code word for them, and they can get you in touch with someone really quickly, and then boom, they'll get you that case number that you so desperately need. We've also seen emails work as well on that contact portion of the studentaid.gov site. Sometimes an email gets a quicker response than waiting on hold for 4 hours. Ensure when these case numbers are sent that they are the correct case numbers. We have seen some folks try the chat and these other methods of getting a case number, and they're not the right case numbers. It's got to be for the sole purpose of the manual verification process for an FSA ID. So sometimes it has that little sort of pre-lettered acronym next to the case number, MANVER. Just ensure when you're on the phone with these people, you're getting contact with FSA and they give you a case number. Ensure it's the right case number for the manual verification process for an FSA ID. So it's been tough, right? Being on the phone, it's been sort of a nightmare, but try and stick with it here. We're finding some different ways to get the hold of this information here. Doing a couple of these things can help smooth the process a little bit. All right, so now I just want to go ahead and talk about some general resources for us to be aware of as we wrap up today's presentation here. On ISAC's page here, our PD page, we do have a FAFSA simplification web page, just to kind of give some high-level overview about what all the changes are, some frequently asked questions about how to sort of tackle some issues, etc. here. So a nice place to walk, say, a parent through if they don't know what's going on. There's like, it's easy to use as talking points, for example, here. We are now going to update this on a weekly basis here, starting up in the next week or two here with all of the new sort of issues that are coming about and the new resolved issues that have already been sort of fixed by FSA. We're going to start to update this to make sure it is up to date as well. So be on the lookout for that. We also have our communication toolkit here that is also a nice sort of tool here, sort of helping guide folks in the communication with our students and families, whether it be when workshops are taking place here or when to complete the application here, different robocall scripts, if you're on the phone with these individuals here, how to kind of go through those, advertisement flyers, etc. So lots of resources on here on the toolkit here if you're looking to kind of spread the word about this financial aid season. Of course, we are offering our professional development from here at the training team, as always here, in-person and virtual options for anything really in the college going process here. Our FAFSA line by line has been updated. Our special student populations have been redesigned. We give monthly webinars throughout the year. Lots of ways to receive training from us here. If you are looking for a specific request, you go on our PD page. There is that request form you can fill out to have a specific section for you and your staff, etc. Talk a little bit about the Financial Aid Completion Initiative here. In Gap Access, we know that high schools can track their financial aid completion numbers, whether it is folks completing the FAFSA, the alternative application, or the opt-out waiver that has now gone to online. It is now on the student portal at studentportal.isac.org. And once folks complete the opt-out waiver online, it will automatically populate into Gap Access. So that's sort of a nice change as well. Again, we get the rosters from the State Board of Education here, and those get uploaded automatically in terms of compliance there. Just know that this is not available quite yet for us to use, right? We are still waiting on FAFSA, or the FSA, I should say, to get those processes done so we can match. So no, it is not available yet. It probably won't be until they start processing things in March. So we're just kind of hanging tight in terms of Gap Access and the completion initiative. Also want to highlight our First Generation Scholars Network here, sort of a new network that we have launched throughout the state to try and encourage our first-gen students to keep going, right? Also giving them the support and access that they need to resources, right? This could be allowing them to connect with a first-gen mentor. Perhaps it's connecting them to a first-gen program on campus. As first-gen is sort of expanding here, more institutions are creating first-gen programs for their students, whether that is giving them scholarships, focus group, cohort model sessions, etc. So these are free. Encourage you guys to join this now with your first-gen students here. Let them be aware of this here, trying to expand our network. And then the moment you've all been waiting for are our CE and PD requests. So if you complete the evaluation for today's session here, you can receive CE and PD hours. This evaluation has been opened in the chat box, bottom right-hand corner of your screen, just a little bubble pops up, right? Just like looks like an iPhone text message icon. You click on that if it's not popped up for you already. Bottom right-hand corner, that's where you'll access the evaluation. You can only access the evaluation through there. Click on that link, and we give you about 48 hours to complete the evaluation. This will be due, and it will close on February 22nd, this Thursday, at the end of day. If you are requesting your PD hours, you must submit to us your Illinois Educator Identification Number. Right? If we do not see your EIN in the evaluation, we cannot award you PD hours. So make sure you get your identification numbers in. Make sure you access the evaluation on the bottom right-hand portion of your screen and complete the evaluation by February 22nd. Again, we will follow up with those completed forms in usually 1 or 2 weeks, just depends how busy we are. We do not have an automated system that automatically sends you these once you complete the evaluation. We have to do them manually ourselves. So sometimes it takes us a little bit of time. So you get those done by February 22nd. We will send you those completed forms in 1 to 2 weeks. And that is all we have for you today, right on time. If you have questions as you go along throughout this financial aid season, please do not hesitate to contact us at our outreach email there. We will be happy to answer any questions or issues you might be facing. If you're facing it, I'm sure others are facing it as well. So we've been gathering a lot of information about the issues here, trying to assist our professionals as best we can. Good luck to you all. I know we're all kind of going through this together. Hopefully this was helpful for all of you to kind of learn about the high level overview changes, as well as some of the open issues that FSA has identified. Hope you all have a great rest of your day. Take care. Enjoy the weather out there. It's nice.